This is the third part in our videos introducing the ancient site of Lachish. We're picking up following the destruction of Lachish in 701. That would be the destruction of level 3 at the hands of the Assyrians led by Sennacherib. This led to a period of total abandonment, and indicative of this is a survey of the wider region conducted by Yehuda Dagan. Throughout the Shephelah, he discovered that the number of inhabited sites declined from 289 sites, and then comes the Assyrian invasion, and the number of sites declines to 85. In terms of acreage, whereas there used to be some 1,029 acres inhabited, that would be assembling all the cities and villages together. From 1,029 acres, it declined to only 343 acres of inhabited sites. Eventually, Lachish was rebuilt and inhabited again, perhaps during the reign of Josiah, who served during 640 to 609 BC. And this may coincide with renewed prosperity of Judea, owing to the collapse of the Assyrian Empire, with particular regard to their domination of the Levant. So while on the one hand it appears that there is a new city wall, yet large areas up on the Acropolis are not repopulated, and that is level 2. Level 2 comes to a fiery destruction when the Babylonians roll through in 587, led by Nebuchadnezzar, sometimes spelled Nebuchadrezzar. Some of the artifacts recovered from that destruction layer involve a large quantity of pottery vessels. They were buried beneath the debris of the level 2 houses. There's so much pottery recovered there that it has served as a real keen source of instruction concerning dating of Judean pottery for this particular period, Iron 2C. Something that you'll see illustrated later are storage jar handles with a rosette stamp on them. Also recovered from this era are the Lachish letters. These are pottery shards, ostraca, with writing on them that contain some military messages. Finally, there were recovered some clay bullae that have Hebrew names impressed on them. One of those is the name Gedaliah. Now we turn our attention to level 1. While there is mention in Nehemiah of resettlement of Lachish, which would correspond then to the latter part of the 5th century, as far as pottery evidence goes, we don't see that until the beginning of the 4th century BC. Once again, the city wall is renewed, built on the foundation left from the level 2 primary city wall. A new city gate has been built above the ruins of the earlier gate. Earlier we made mention of the solar shrine. The dating of that shrine now belongs to level 1. This level spans both Persian and also Hellenistic influence. So we do find coins and pottery that pertain to the Hellenistic era. As we come to the close of the Hellenistic period, the settlement grows smaller and smaller. More recent remains consist of Muslim graves, and then much more recently, trenches, graffiti, and coins and rifle cartridges belonging to Israel's War of Independence. This wraps up our period-by-period survey, and now we'll pick up some images, photos, and artifacts that we'll attempt to put in chronological order to help illustrate the Lachish site. This picture from the 4th expedition to Lachish, which was one of the later expeditions, shows us the Canaanite temple which they uncovered. And it's actually rather early, isn't it? 12th century BC. Also uncovered from that temple are these artifacts. As you progress in your familiarization with the kind of vessels typical for the various eras, some of these should look familiar to you. We have the collared-rimmed jars in the back. These would be the ones which in later era would be stamped for the king. These are from an earlier era, so I expect they wouldn't have that stamp. In the center, the lower centered portion, you may notice a pilgrim flask. And then towards the lower left, a lamp that has the pinched form. In the bottom row, just right of center, you see the little pyxis jars, a variety of serving bowls. Also recovered from this Canaanite temple, 12th century, are these metal figurines which, because of the arm position, have been designated smiting gods. Other artifacts of interest recovered through this fourth expedition are some boule, the clay blobs that have a seal impress on them. Here you can see the sector AA where they were retrieved from, and more particularly zooming in on that region, we can see what was uncovered by the fourth expedition. Notice that this dates to Iron Age. So the 701 Assyrian destruction is what is recorded in this particular layer. So we see a variety of levels, color-coded. We're interested especially in the green square, because that's the zone where the pottery was found, a juglet was found with the boule in them. And we'll zero in on that zone in the next slide. That green square corresponds to the quadrant OA26 that you see in the sketch on the right. And this sketch on the right is just a pencil reproduction of the actual stonework that you see on the left. I'll leave this up for a bit so that you can, visually you can arc between the actual and the sketch and realize they're representing the same thing. Also, the sketch is helpful because it kind of disambiguates from the excavation that is simply soil removal as opposed to actually foundation walls. I draw your attention in the sketch version of OA26 to the small figure of what looks like a little juglet. And now in the next slide, we'll see the actual picture of the discovery of the juglet, which contained some of these boule. So again, this is Iron Age Era 2B, corresponding to level 3, as they were peeling away the layers of Lachish. Here then is a close-up of OA26 before they had fully removed this small juglet. You can get an appreciation for how small it is based on the measuring device in the lower portion. Dipper juglets of this size can be seen in the Flora collection, so that gives you an idea of the scale. The article by Klingbeil indicates that a couple of the boule were found in the jug, and when they noticed that, they very carefully sifted through the surrounding soil, and some of it was sent away from the dig site in order to be wet sifted, and additional boule, one or more, were found for a total of 4 found as a result of the wet sifting. So here we have the actual boule impression, both the front and the back. As is described at the bottom, what these served was to indicate the ownership or the source of a message. So it was a papyrus roll. It was tied around with a string. Then the clay is applied to the string as a seal to immobilize it, to show that it has not been opened. And then the impression is made on the wet clay. As you may have deduced, the sketch in the upper right is trying to clarify, particularly for artistic and paleographic reasons, the impression that you see on the left. They are one and the same. As far as the pronunciation of the inscription, it may be vocalized Le Eliakim, a name that happens to be attested in Isaiah 37. We're not saying it's the same person, just noticing that in the biblical account they do know of such a name. Here's the second bulla. I find it interesting to look at the back because you can actually see the lines of the string that it was pressed into. Vocalization here may be Yehozarak. We know of this kind of a first half of the name from Jehozadak. The J and the Y are just variant ways to vocalize, or to transliterate rather, the same Hebrew letter. Routinely it's a Y, a Yod. We don't have this exact name attested, but Jehozadak is close to it. It lets us know that the general structure of the name certainly was known in the biblical record. I've included this photo because I feel the aerial view helps us to appreciate better the approach road and the bastion and outer gate, and then the inner gate, which is lower. You see the approach road in the upper left, and then the outer gate, and finally the six-chambered inner gate. Notice that this is 8th century, so that would indicate that we're working with the time frame leading right up to the destruction with Sennacherib and the Assyrians. The purpose of the sketch on the left is to orient us according to a scenario we're familiar with. The photograph was taken as if standing in the blue arrow facing in the direction of the blue arrow. These iron arrowheads were recovered from Lachish, and they date to the Assyrian siege. The fact that some bone arrowheads were also found suggests that the defenders may have exhausted their supply of iron and then resorted to inferior weaponry materials. These large storage jars have the symbol or the writing on them, La Melech. Melech means king, La means belonging to. It's thought that since they belong to level 3, and they would have been destroyed then as in consequence of the Assyrian siege in 701, these may represent royal provisions that were stockpiled in the event of a siege, which did finally take place. These sling stones were discovered at Lachish as well, so this is a vivid reminder of the actual conflict that unfolded at 701. Earlier mention was made about these stones with holes that are bored through them, and in this encyclopedia picture you can see photos of several of these stones. These would have been swung on chains by the defenders standing on top of the walls, and the back and forth action then is intended to dislodge the siege ladders. Notice where these were excavated. The foot of the outer revetment wall. So you have the revetment wall, and then you have the inner actual city wall. These stones range in weight from 220.5 pounds to 441 pounds. That's a lot of momentum going back and forth. You can appreciate how that could knock a shaky ladder easily off its moorings. I imagine it could damage a siege engine on wheels as well. What appears next is not at Lachish but at Nineveh. Keep in mind that Sennacherib is coming from Nineveh to wage campaign against the Levant. When he has victory over Lachish, but not victory over Jerusalem, he will go back to Nineveh and record his war exploits. That's what you'll see next. This is a terracotta foundation document in cuneiform. It dates, as you can see, shortly after the siege of Lachish and the attempted capture of Jerusalem in 701. This was excavated from within Nineveh, and it documents on the lines, the columns and lines that you see, the capture of Lachish and the siege of Jerusalem. Extra-biblical attestation for a historical event that is documented in the Hebrew Bible as well. As Sennacherib recalls his exploits, it's fascinating that he honestly acknowledges defeat of Lachish, but he only says that he was able to imprison the king of Israel in Jerusalem, that is to keep him from moving out. He caged him, but he was not able to be victorious. That also fits with the biblical account. Also in Nineveh, in the southern palace, is just a majestic relief that runs for multiple feet, perhaps 20 feet or more. And it is as though we have a panoramic snapshot of Sennacherib during the Lachish siege, right at Lachish. In a separate video, you're able to see panel by panel of this really extensive relief that was removed from the palace in Nineveh and now can be seen in Gallery 10 of the British Museum. What we're looking at right here is Sennacherib on his field throne. Notice how ornate is that throne. You see various of his attendants are coming, presenting themselves before him. Not visible in this panel, but we'll see elsewhere, is the actual attack of the city. You may notice that the face of the regent is disfigured, and that was done in ancient times. To me, it's reminiscent of what we see in Egypt. Sometimes successors to a previous famous, illustrious ruler will destroy the representation of that ruler in an effort to downplay their influence or to show that they have vanquished them or succeeded them. This is part of that same long hallway panel. This is to the left of the throne. And here you see warriors, kind of rank on rank of warriors. Some with shields, some with swords, some with circular shields, some with a vertical sort of defense mechanism. Far left you see some archers. And in the upper right is a representation of the defensive walls. The sloping line in the lower right then is the siege ramp. And if you look closely, it appears to be made of bricks. And you may recall earlier that archaeologists discerned that the top layer of this artificial ramp, this enormous artificial ramp, had to be smooth enough to roll the siege engines up against towards the fortress. And in order to do that, there was an earthen type layer on top of the boulders and on top of the other surfacing of the siege ramp. This particular artifact was not excavated at Lachish, but rather in Nimrud from the Northwest Palace. You can see it now in the British Museum. It's an Assyrian helmet of iron. What captures my attention is the fact that this conical shape resembles some that are depicted in the reliefs of the Lachish siege. Initially, this might strike us as almost a humorous way to fashion head protection, but frankly, if you think about sword fights, if you have a downward cut, which is a common type of blow to split open the skull, this is a great angle, defensive angle, to result in only a glancing blow rather than cracking open your helmet. Now we transition from 701 and the Assyrian attack to the conflict that's brewing when Nebuchadnezzar, having already been in Palestine, returns again and plans to conquer Jerusalem. What we have here is one of the Lachish letters. It's written on a piece of pottery known as an ostrakhan. The sender is a military leader at an outpost named Hoshayahu. He's sending it to a superior officer who is operating from Lachish, The superior officer's name is Yaosh. Hoshayahu registers increasing anxiety because he is aware that Nebuchadnezzar has come back to the territory. You can read the translation in quotes. Some of the artifacts recovered from Lachish are jar handles with this particular sort of winged creature impression. Also retrieved are some handles with the impression of a rosette. You can see both the rosette up close, and then in the left you see where it's located towards the top of the jar handle. These rosettes date from the destruction of Nebuchadnezzar. That concludes our study of Lachish, and here you can see resources that I found helpful in learning about this very, very prominent and multi-layered site in ancient Israel.